Hi, my name is Dave Bode for Envato, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to use this motion type text template for After Effects that you can find on Envato Elements. This is a modular text treatment with 6 different styles that works with any font, and it's super customizable. You're going to learn how to customize this text animation and build a basic graphic from scratch in this video. Now, I'm going to move pretty quickly and go step by step through the process, but even if you're newer to After Effects, you should be able to follow along. Let's get started. Now, if you're unfamiliar, Envato Elements is a subscription-based digital asset library where you can find everything from stock video to video templates, music, sound effects, graphics templates, photos, 3D assets, and a lot more. They have a broad commercial license, so you can use these assets in all of your projects. Alrighty, so this is the page where you can download the motion type text video template from Envato Elements. And when you do, you're going to get a zip file, and you're going to unzip it, and you're going to get a folder called Motion Type Titles V2. So if we jump into this folder here, we're going to see footage, an old version, video tutorial, which you can check out, or you can continue to watch this tutorial. And then we have a help file and a Motion Type Titles V.2. And in this project file, you'll have 3 additional text treatments or title animations that were not demoed on the Envato page with the demo video. So you can check that out if you want, but for now, I'm going to jump into the old version here, and I'm going to open up this Motion Type Titles V.1. You can click OK at this dialog box here. All it's saying is this project was created in an older version of After Effects and needs to be converted. Just click OK, and it'll open right up. You'll probably get another dialog box that's saying that this project uses fonts that are not currently available on this computer. I'm not worried about that. You shouldn't be worried about that. Just click OK, because I'm going to show you how to change the fonts to something different anyway. It's also letting us know that there's 1 file missing since you last saved the project. Not a big deal as well. That's probably one of the background elements, which I'm not going to be using anyway. All right. Before we go on, once we have this opened up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this. And that way I have an untouched version of the project file. And if I want to go back to that at some point, I have a clean plate to start from. All right, let's check out what we have going on in this project. If we jump over here to the project panel, we have a folder that says don't edit. We can just leave that alone. Then we have motion type titles, and inside this folder, we have 3 folders called type 01, type 02, and type 03. In each one of these, we have a collection of folders, title 01, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then in each one of these folders is a composition that contains one of these text animations. All right, so this is, if you saw the demo, this is maybe the first one, the second one, and the third one. So each one of these 3 folders here is a different animation. And then there are 5 duplications of that in this type 01 folder. And the reason is because these compositions have to be named something very specific in order for the text to update properly. If you rename this, you'll essentially break the way that the things in the background are working, and it's not going to work right. So for your convenience, they've duplicated this. So if you like this first text animation here and you want to use it a few times, you have that already set up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into this type 03 because that's the one that I like. So I'm going to double click this to open that up. And I'm going to click on this little flyout menu here and just close the other panels in this group because I don't want to see those other comps open. All right, so let's check out what this looks like. This is the one I want to work with. And right away, let's talk about how to start customizing this. The first thing you're going to want to do is probably change the text. So down here in the composition panel, I'm going to double click on this Your Text layer here. This is a text layer, but this is a guide layer, meaning that it's not going to render in the final composition. So I'm going to double click on that. It's going to select the text for me, and I'm going to type in my new title. And I'm going to type tech review. I want to create a slick looking title for my tech reviews. All right. Now, the second thing you may notice, or you may not have noticed, is that this font does not match this font. Okay, so if you're thinking that you can change the font here and it'll update here, that's not how it works. And I do want to change this font. I want to pick something that's a little bit beefier, a little bit fatter, a thicker font. So I'm going to double click on this comp down here called Change Font Style. That's going to take me into this other comp here where I see a bunch of text layers, and we don't have to get into what's happening here. We just have to know enough to change the font. I'm going to select all these layers. Then I'm going to come over here to the character, and I want to change this to Envato Bold. Now, I know it says that already, but that's actually not what's going on here. I'm just going to type in Envato Bold, and then hit Enter. And hopefully, yeah, okay, there we go. Now it's updated. And then if we hop back to our Type 03 Title 1, we should see this updated. All right, cool. Now you can see we have this big fat text here, and that's going to look much better for this type of animation. We're going to see all these cool looking angles here a lot better. So I'm going to hop down the timeline here to where everything is visible, and you'll see that the tracking or the spacing between the text is kind of goofy looking, and I want to fix that. I'm going to set the resolution here to auto. That'll slow things down, but it'll make it a little bit clearer to align things. To align things, I want to create for myself another kind of alignment layer. So I'm just going to grab the Type tool, and I'm going to type out Tech Review. All right, I'm going to make it nice and big like this, and then I'm just going to kind of eyeball align it here. I'm also going to turn off adaptive resolution because that drives me absolutely insane. It'll be a little bit slower on final quality. However, it's going to be a lot easier to line things up. So I'm just going to line this up with the arrow keys here. And what I want to do is try to match the scale. So I'm already pretty close here at 224 on the font size. So I'm going to jump into the scale here, and I want to make sure that my anchor point is all the way at the bottom. So I'm just going to hit Y, grab this anchor point, and I'll hold Control to snap it right in the corner, because you can see I have snapping disabled. So if I hold Control, that will temporarily enable snapping, and I'll be able to snap that right to the corner there. And I'm just going to try like 101. And I think I actually need to just position this down just a hair. All right, that looks good. And then maybe 101.5. My favorite radio station. All right, I'd say that's pretty close. I'm going to pull this down to the bottom of the layer stack. Switch back to my selection tool here. I'm going to unshy all these layers that are currently hidden when I click this little shy guy right there. So what you didn't see before with the shy switch set, that is a tongue twister, is that for each one of these characters in the title, there is a separate layer. So what you want to do to align this is you want to select each one of these and then move them over. I'm just going to do that with the arrow keys and also hitting Shift here to make the movements a little bit bigger. And then when I get close, I'll just dial it in. I also want to change this alignment layer text here to something pretty bright, something like this. And also, you see there is a glow down here, and that's actually these bottom layers right here, and I don't want those. So for now, I'm just going to select those and delete them. It's just one less thing that has to be rendered. I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm just going to align this manually. It'll take a little bit, but it's not a big deal at all. All right, this character right here is actually the space in between these two words. So I'm just going to kind of put that right there and continue on. All right, that's looking plenty close enough for me. And I think this will work just fine. So I'm going to get rid of my alignment layer here and just give this another quick preview. Very cool. That looks great. Before we build this out any further, I just want to show you this option layer here. If we click on the effects controls, this option layer has a bunch of options here for setting the glow, shadow, opacity. However, since I deleted those layers, that's not going to do anything, so that's not really a big deal. We have some options for the size of the text and the rotation of the text. I'm going to leave it like it is for now. We have color control. We can change the color for each individual letter here. And I'm going to leave that all at the default. But you can jump in here and change this and make it look however you want. I'm going to hop back over here to the project panel. And I'm going to create for myself a new composition. Clicking the new comp button here. I'm going to call this Tech Review Title. Set it to 1920 by 1080, 23.976. And I really don't need this that long. I'm going to make this 7 seconds long. Something really, really quick. All right, so I'm going to pull in my Type 03 Title 01 composition into this layer. And I'm just going to move down the timeline here so I can actually see what I'm doing. And I'll just kind of position this in the middle. Now, getting this positioned up and aligned is a little bit tricky because this layer is gigantic and we're actually only using this little bit of the layer right here. So to save me a little bit of headache, what I'm going to do is come up here and grab the rectangle tool and just draw a simple mask around your title and try and get it pretty symmetrical. So the spacing here is pretty close to the spacing here. And then lock your mask. And then what I want to do is set the anchor point right in the middle. And there's actually a shortcut for that. It's Control-Alt-Home. And then I want to position the layer right in the middle, and there's a shortcut for that, and it's Control-Home. There. And now when I'm working with this, kind of aligning things is going to be a lot easier. I switch back to the selection tool here, and I want to scale this down. I'm going to hit S to bring up the scale, and I'm going to scale this maybe to about there. Something like that. I think that should look pretty cool. I also want to create a box for this to kind of live in. So with nothing else selected, I'm going to grab the rectangle tool again. I'm going to create a shape layer here and maybe something about like that. I'm going to pull this down below my title here. I'm going to hit Enter with that layer selected and rename this to Box. I'm going to go into the properties here of the rectangle. I'm going to set this fill here to kind of a dark gray, maybe a little bit darker. Yeah, something like that I think works pretty well. And I'm also going to do the same shortcut here to reset the anchor point right in the middle. So Control-Alt-Home. You see it just moves a tiny little bit, and then Control-Home to recenter that. I'm going to link this to my type layer right here, and I can actually rename this. You can't rename it here, but I can rename it inside this comp. So I'm going to call this front title because I'm actually going to make a rear title. So I parented my box to this so that if I scale my text up, my box is going to scale with it. I'm going to take my front title here and I'm going to duplicate it, Control-D on the keyboard, and pull this guy down here. I'm going to rename this rear title. I'm going to hit S to bring up the scale, and I'm going to scale this up so it's pretty big. And that's going to look pretty nasty at 100%, but I'm actually going to add a blur to that. So I'm going to come over here to the effects and presets and add a fast box blur and maybe do, I don't know, like 5 or something. Yeah, maybe like 7. That looks pretty cool. And I'm going to set the opacity to something like, I don't know, 15%, something like that. And that should look pretty cool. Yeah, I think that looks pretty nice. Maybe scale it up a little more. I also want the box to appear first. So I'm going to take my 2 titles here and slide them down a little bit. And then I'm going to come in here to the box and then into the rectangle path. I'm going to uncheck Constrain Proportions. And right at about 1 second, I'm going to set a keyframe here for the size. And then I'm going to come back to, I don't know, maybe about 8 frames. And I'm going to set the Y size to 0. And then I'm going to come back to the beginning and set the X to 0 as well. All right, so I'm going to have my box kind of grow out like this. Now, the speed that that is growing out there doesn't look super. So I'm going to hit F9 to easy ease those keyframes. That looks a little bit better. I still would like it a little bit faster though. So what I'm going to do is, with the size keyframes selected, I'm going to jump into the graph editor. And I'm going to select these keyframes here by drawing a rectangular marquee. And I'll double click on them. I'm going to set the incoming velocity to 85%. All right. I'm going to select these middle keyframes here, double click on them, set the incoming velocity to 85% and the outgoing velocity to 35%. You can experiment with different velocity numbers, but I find that those work pretty well. And I like the way that looks. So now all I want to do is I want to get the titles here kind of lined up so they start coming in at just the right moment. So they really don't start appearing till right here. So I think that just about works. It looks like they're going to kind of overlap, but that actually works just fine. And because I want this to kind of grow in and grow out, what I'm going to do is, with my box layer selected, I'm going to hit U. I'm going to take my keyframes here. I'm going to copy them. I'm going to just scooch down the timeline here. I'm going to paste them, but I want them to go in reverse order here. So with them selected, I'm going to right click on them, choose Keyframe Assistant, and then Time Reverse Keyframes. And I'll just slide these all the way to the end. Now I also want my text here to kind of animate in and then animate out. And there's a really simple way to do that. I'm going to enable time remapping by using the keyboard shortcut Control-Alt-T. And I'm going to kind of scrub along. I'll just solo up this layer here and figure out wherever this animation gets finished here, which looks to be about, yeah, right about here. And I'm going to add a keyframe. Then I'm going to go to the next keyframe by clicking this little right arrow here, and I'm going to remove it. And so now it's just going to go to this time and then basically hold for the rest. But what I want it to do is to reverse out. So I'm going to select these two time keyframes, copy them, and then paste them. And then just as I did before, I'm going to right click here, choose Keyframe Assistant, and then Time Reverse Keyframes. Then I should be able to align this one right about where this one is relative to these keyframes. So now it's going to kind of do that animation in reverse. And hopefully it'll be out of the way by the time my box collapses. And it looks like it's just about there. Let's see. Perfect. That is fantastic. Now I also want the background title to be doing the same thing as this title in terms of its time remapping. So I'm going to also enable time remapping on my rear title, Control-Alt-T, and I'm just going to take the time remap in pick whip with this little pick whip right here, the time remap from my front title. And that will mean that they are going to do the exact same thing. You can see they're going to go out the same way. All right, a few more things that I want to do to make this look pretty cool. I want to add a background layer here with maybe a grid on it or something. So I'm going to right click in a blank space here, go to New, Solid, and I'll just leave it set to black solid. I'm going to put it at the bottom of the layer stack. I'll just rename it Grid so that I know what I'm looking at here. Then over in the effects controls, I'm going to search for Grid. And right down here, Generate Grid, I'm going to drop that on. I'm going to choose width and height sliders and maybe do something like I don't know, 20 and 20. Set the border to something like 4, and then drop the opacity by hitting T, something like 5. It's like really, really subtle, but I think it'll work. You can use maybe like 7 or 8. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Now I want my grid to kind of fade up and fade down, so I'm going to drop some opacity keyframes here. I'll go to 1 second, put an opacity keyframe, I'll come back to the beginning, set it to 0, and then just like I did before, I'll copy these keyframes, hop down the timeline here, and just paste them, right-click, time reverse keyframes, and then just drag these right to the end. All right, let's check out what we have so far. All right, I think this is looking great. The one final touch that I want to add is a little bit of movement here. Now, in that preview, I'm feeling like this front title is a little bit small. I'm going to hit S, bring up the scale, and just bump this up a little bit. Also bump up my rear just a wee bit more. And maybe make this, I don't know, 60. Yeah, that looks good. So what I want to do is I want to have the scale kind of grow over time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a little expression here. But to make it a little bit easier on myself, I'm going to come over here to the effects controls, and I'm going to grab a slider control. I'm going to drop that on my front title. And all this is just a number that I'm going to use in my expression to make this a little bit easier to make adjustments. I'm going to hit enter on my effect here and rename this scale. Now, if you don't know anything about expressions, don't worry, just kind of follow along and you'll absorb some information just by following along. I'm going to Alt-click on the stopwatch, and I'm going to type S equals time times, and then I'm going to pick whip my scale slider. Then I'm going to do semicolon, and then I'm going to type value plus begin bracket S, comma, S, end bracket, enter. And you'll see that did absolutely nothing. And if I scrub along the timeline here, solo this so that it goes a little bit faster, it's not doing anything. However, once we change this value here, let's say we do 1, what you'll see is now this is going to grow. So this title renders a little bit slow, so I'm going to solo up the box instead so you can see this scale expression in action. And you can see the scale increase over time here. Looks pretty good. All right, so it's moving, it's getting bigger over time. It has a pretty cool look to it. Now what I want is I want the rear title to do the same thing, but I want it to go slower. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy this scale slider control here. And I'm going to paste it down on the rear title. And then I'm going to take this expression and I'm going to copy that. So I can just select the scale, right click on it, choose copy expression only. And then on the scale of my rear title, just paste it. Now, in order to get my rear title to scale up slower, I need to use a lower value here. So I'm going to choose 0.5. Now I'll preview it and you'll see what this does. All right, I think the movement of the rear title is pretty subtle, so I might bump this up to something like 0.7. Let's see what that looks like. All right, I think that looks pretty fantastic. You can use this as is, or what I would do is, because there's a lot of transparency here, if I turn on the transparency grid, it looks like things are disappearing, but actually it's just the grid and the title here are well, they're pretty transparent. And how I would use this title is over some blurred footage that's been darkened down in my video editing application. I think that would look pretty cool. The main title here, you can see when I turn this on, is going to remain completely opaque, and so that'll pop right out. But the grid and the text here will overlay really nicely with some footage that's been blurred out and then darkened down. I think that'll look really cool. All right, this project is now ready to render, but there's a few things I want to go over before you do. This project has transparency in it, right? We've seen that before. We turn on the transparency grid and you can see that these items here, if we hit T on the keyboard, they have a pretty low transparency. Now, sometimes, depending on the codec that you're using, when you render these out, things that have a very low opacity or that are a little bit blurry can look a little bit jagged with certain codecs. The compression gets a little funny in these blurry areas here. So you may find some flickering, or you may find that there is some kind of jagged looking edges here. There's a few tricks to get around that. One is you can use a codec that is lossless, something like a PNG image sequence. That is a little bit more trouble to work with because you get a folder with, well, if we switch this to frames here, you'll get 168 images, or 167 if you count 0 here, in that folder. And that's not quite as easy as just a video file, but it will look very good. If you want to render this out as a video, I like to use GoPro Cineform with an alpha channel, and that works really great. However, when I've rendered this type of thing before, these blurry edges here and parts of this grid, especially the really, really thin lines, can sometimes flicker a little bit. So I found a bit of a workaround that can work for this particular graphic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to pull down another solid here. No need to make a new one because there's a black solid up here. And when I do, if I toggle on transparent pixels, you'll see that it's now fully opaque. What I want to do is I want to add a noise to this black solid. So I'm going to come over here to my effects and presets. I'll type in noise and I'll drop a noise effect on here. I'm going to set this to something like 10%, which is actually pretty high. You could render it like this. It would look okay. However, you wouldn't have those transparent pixels, so you couldn't really put this over some other footage unless you used a blending mode. And that may or may not work. You know, you can experiment with that however you want. However, I can just drop the opacity on this. I can set this to something like 30% opacity. And if I turn on those transparent pixels, you'll see that the background is indeed darker, but that'll actually work okay because I'm going to put this over footage and I'm going to darken down that footage anyway. And that noise will really help to blend all of those blurry pixels together in such a way that it will look very, very good when we use a compressed codec like Cineform. So if that's cool for you, that's cool for me. Now we can send this to the render queue. So I'm going to come up here to Composition, Add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue. I want to pick a codec with an alpha channel. I like to use QuickTime, and I'm using Media Encoder CC2018. CC2019 actually has ProRes codecs available, but I'm cool using 2018 because it's still a little bit more stable for the things that I'm doing here. And I'm going to use GoPro Cineform. I can either use RGB 12-bit with alpha or 12-bit with alpha at maximum bit depth. Either one of these will work. And if you want, the default preset for this has audio, but you can click on this and it will open up and you can deselect export audio, and you could actually save this as a preset. So we could call this Cineform 12-bit alpha no audio. And now that'll be available for you right there. And then we'll just render this out. And that's pretty much it. Now that is ready to use with an alpha channel in your video editor of choice, and you can use that over footage, and it should look fantastic. So that about wraps it up for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you can get some use out of this text treatment video template. Hey, thanks so much for watching again. My name is Dave Bode for Envato, and I'll see you around.